From President Biden to Hollywood celebrities, we're being told that the new election laws in Georgia are the new Jim Crow laws. Biden even called them Jim Eagle in a poor attempt to make them seem worse than the laws of the Jim Crow era.
This makes Jim Crow look like Jim Eagle. I mean, this is gigantic.
So with that comparison being made, I think it's only fair that we take a look at the new Georgia election laws and compare them to the old Jim Crow laws. The big complaints are about the changes in absentee voting, anyone supplying food and beverage to voters waiting in line to vote, and the state being able to essentially take over county polling places if they're doing a poor job. We'll talk more about each of these, but first let me share 3 voting laws from the Jim Crow era just to get a little perspective. They had literacy tests back then. That was a law that said if you couldn't read, you couldn't vote. But of course, the people enforcing the law were white, so many illiterate whites were still allowed to vote, while many literate blacks were not. They also had poll taxes, which would be like having to pay $50 just to vote, which disenfranchised the poor, of course, many of whom were black. And they even had all-white primary elections. Check this out from the website of America's Black Holocaust Museum. In the South, from about 1900 to about 1960, the Democratic candidates usually won. Republicans were almost never elected, especially in the Deep South. This means that the Democratic primary election was usually the only election that mattered. African Americans were not allowed to vote in the Democratic primary elections. White Democrats said the Democratic Party was a club and did not allow black members, so blacks could not vote in the only elections that mattered. Now let's go back to what people are calling the new Jim Crow laws in Georgia and take a closer look. In the 2020 primary, Georgia sent absentee ballots to all registered voters. This new law prohibits sending out unsolicited ballots unless the governor declares a state of emergency. So to vote absentee in Georgia, you'll have to request an absentee ballot. That seems reasonable, doesn't it? The second controversial thing about the changes in absentee voting is that they'll no longer match signatures as a way of checking if the ballot was really filled out by the actual voter. Now the voter will have to supply their driver's license number, or the number on their state ID card, or the last 4 digits of their social security number. And remember, every American has a social security number. But if you don't have either of those IDs and can't remember your social, you can use a copy of your water bill, a bank statement, or even a government check. That's hardly anything like a poll tax or a literacy test. Now let's talk about the new law not allowing people to give food and beverages to voters who are waiting in line at a polling station. Democrats are claiming that it's controversial because the lines are so long that people will suffer without having anything to drink as they wait in line to cast their vote. But that's not true. The law actually states that a polling place can have a watering station for people to use while they're waiting in line. But get this. The law also mandates that if precincts of a certain substantial size had lines of more than an hour long in the previous general election, then county officials have to reduce the size of the precinct or get more poll workers, voting equipment, or both for the next election. So not only does the new law allow people waiting in long lines to stay hydrated, it requires polling stations to fix the problems that cause the long lines. As far as I can tell, the part that Democrats seem to be upset about is that the new law stops people from electioneering. It makes it illegal to give a gift to a voter at a polling place, and food or beverage is considered a gift. That's hardly a Jim Crow-style law. The third big change in Georgia election law is that the state election board can essentially take over a county election if it's being poorly run. But that doesn't mean that in the middle of an election they can just barge right in and take control. The law states that a majority of the board would have to decide that the officials demonstrated nonfeasance, malfeasance, or gross negligence in at least 2 elections over a 2-year period, or that the county officials committed at least 3 violations of election law or board regulations in the last 2 general election cycles and had not sufficiently remedied these violations. So what's the argument against that? Should county officials be allowed to violate election laws without any consequences? It seems to me that the only way you could be against this law is if you're okay with people cheating in elections. Look, obviously these new laws are nothing like the Jim Crow South, where a Democrat would burn your house down if you were black and voted. But I see why Joe Biden is against them. He won Georgia under the rules as they were, so of course he doesn't want them changed. But it's bigger than that. This is a smear campaign designed to anger Democrats and black voters and to help push along the federal government's takeover of state-controlled elections with H.R. 1, or as they've named it, For the People Act of 2021. It's not the new Jim Crow era in Georgia. There's no segregation, no polling taxes, no literacy tests, and you don't have to own property to vote. This new law even expands early voting across the state to 2 weekends before the election. It actually makes it easier to vote, and at the same time makes the elections in Georgia more secure. That's why you're not hearing many Democrats actually discussing the specifics of the new law. In their pursuit of power, Democrats always use language that harkens back to a time when they treated blacks as second-class citizens. Don't forget, during the Jim Crow era, more than a quarter of the people who were lynched were white Republicans. Republicans who were fighting against Jim Crow. No matter how they try to spin it, this new law has nothing to do with racism. Republicans have never been the party of Jim Crow, and they never will be. But Democrats can't say that. And that's the simple truth. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, subscribe to our channel, and if you want to become a supporting member of Blue Collar Logic, click on the link in the description and give what you can.